Welcome to the Unique History channel. Tonight we'll be doing a reading of the National Bolshevist manifesto, which is by Karl Otto paetel, and we will be doing part 1, pages 1 to 33, or from Vision to War and Peace. Let's jump in. Vision. The red flag flutters over the Cologne Cathedral. Revolution over Germany. Radiogram from Berlin. To the German people, land and soil belong to the nation. The means of production are socialized. Elections to the Council Congress are announced. The verdict of the people's courts on all the enemies of the socialist fatherland, or all those responsible for the old regime, are enforced. The Treaty of Versailles is torn to pieces. Greater Germany is socialist. The imperialist bandit states are approaching. The Rhine is to be held under all circumstances. The counterattack is to be hindered. Long columns, black on black, trek across the Rhine bridges. Singing rings out. Flag in rhythm with the tramp of marching feet. Columns of workers, rifles shoulders. In their midst flags with the hammer and sickle, the bars, the Marseillaise, the fatherland is in danger. A short distance behind them come streamlined figures in brown shirts. Above their heads, the red swastika banner, and over that a red pennant with the symbols of labor, their arms half covered with red stripes. A new column, gray on gray, endless troops of the Stahlhelm, behind the war flags of the Great War in 1914 and 1918. Their flags also beckon with a red pennant of the revolutionary uprising and the peasant formations beyond them. And luminescent above the flags, over red, black, white, and black banners raising its wing, the Black Eagle of Prussia, singing roars to the columns of the army. And the chorus is always growing stronger. All the troops take up gray, brown, red in formations, coming in to the Rhine, to the Rhine, to the German Rhine, guardians we all want to be, and shout out, long live under socialism. We carry the red flag under the German eagle into France. Forwards. The voice breaks off. Only with the masses marched, endless, with different flags and different dress in the same step, marching in enemy territory. Suppress freedom, bringing the Lord's retribution for a life of human bondage. The gateway is to tomorrow. The way of it, the way we are. The task. Germany has to fight today for the freedoms of its unfreeborn children, for a future home for its homeless, for the future of the hopeless generations. But not only that, in German territory, the vision of our century will be shaped. Here shall the formal principle of the Mitteleuropa have to be proven. The fight for the sovereignty of the German lands will decide the fight for Europe's future, the rise or fall of the West. In German hearts and German minds today, the forces of the East are already feuding with the principles of Western thought. The solution will have to be to find one's own principle. In the body of the German people, Deutsche Volksgruppe, within German territories, the decisive battle will be fought between world mercantilist economy and socialist statehood. Here is the class struggle between the proletarian dynamicism and the bourgeois self-reliance will be fulfilled. The task lies before the young generation of the political Germans is one of decades. To solve it means giving a new, creative meaning to the old misused concept of German imperial world mission. That, on third attempt, the German nation building, which was unsuccessful in the Alten Reich and the Stadtwetterreich, as well as the Bismarckian Reich, will become a reality. To break away from this task means gambling the future of internal Germany, swifting the Switzerlandization of the German folk into its final stage. The task is becoming a nation. The grandeur is called socialism. The path to it, revolution. Only those called to this task within will understand what is about to, alone and above all, to open the door for the proletarianized Volk, to break all its bonds, chaos, adversity, affirmation of victimhood, class, the state, granting its personal happiness, in order that reality for the German people shall be the nation as the highest value. 10 years of National Bolshevism. Wherever in young Germany today the death deathly stillness of official politics is alarmed by an underground tremor where the unconditionally of nationalist youth calls into question the old values of their fathers, over whose funeral shrouds the elderly wail with spread hands, registering the still but emotional socialist demand of the national revolutionary young bourgeoisie. Whether the proletariat seems to recognize only the German eagle on the red flags will create a fatherland for them, which bears the national fervor for those without a homeland. There does one see in the bourgeois papers a watchword: National Bolshevism. But what historical facts arose in Germany to trigger the political movement meant by that phrase? It is simply not enough to take a pro-Russia policy as its citation. You see, it simply is nothing but foreign policy, not at all. Its conception of foreign policy is indeed the only self-evident result of a very basic assessment. The first truly National Bolshevist document was the political testament of Count Brodkov-Randzu, in which he set down the belief that a German radical socialism must take in hand, beneath the banners of socialism, a policy of freedom against Western imperialism and capitalism. Brockdorff's Ratsism refusal to sign the Treaty of Versailles, Lenin's offer to the people's deputies to support the resistance on the Rhine, these were the political realities behind it. The second National Bolshevist wave was the policy of fraternized pursued by the Hamburg National Communist Circle under the Wolfenheim-Laufenburg, with parts of the General Lettow-Vorburg's Freikorps in Hamburg and other cities. Later, there were the efforts in Munich to come to a joint action between the communists, Thomas Volksvolkisch Police President Pornier, and the fellows of the Freikorps Oberland, attempting such an organizing in Thuringia in the East Prussian border guard, yes, among the capped soldiers. Writings such as Wolfenheim's Nation and Working Class, a dissertation against the methods in Russia titled Moscow and the German Revolution, the open letter to Major General Letwak Vorbeck, Communism, a National Imperative, by Judicial Councillor Truffaut, among others. These were the ideological weapons in which those within the circles of the Communist Party and the right-wing radical groups campaigned for its synthesis. The Hamburger Volksart at time Kommentiets Aberbergsen were available representative newspapers. In practical terms, all these efforts came to nothing. Secht made it clear that he would put down any national communist uprising. In the meantime, national social groups formed the NKPD, prescribed the Hamburg circles, and the connective threads in Hamburg between men like Stapel and A.E. Grunter, and a number of nationalist youth leaders that had led to the national communists were torn away again. Wolfenheim, who in Hamburg had power at his hands on November 6, 1918, was neutralized by the revolution of the National Assembly. Later, the Rufenkampf once again led to the revival of these tendencies. After Schlegler's execution in 1923, Karl Otto, on the 20th of June, delivered to the Central Committee of the KPD his famous speech entitled Stockenlager, the Wanderer into Void, which called upon the honest nationalists to integrate into the front of the Red Revolution, which along would fight for national freedom, as the Ruthless was being betrayed yet again by the bourgeoisie. The debate between communists Radek and Forchik and the nationalists Rethrew and Moller Vanderbroek over going a bit of the way together was thereupon initiated in the Roten Fanhi, the Volkisch Reichstag of Count Rentlow, and the Ring of Baron von Gleichen. Likewise, that too eventually failed. In 1929, these concepts, which had, in the meantime, become worked out ever more clearly and concertedly, were revived again by the other side, this time by the right. First in Jürgen Volk, then in Kommenden, two newspapers of the National Revolutionary Youth, were National Bolshevist demands discussed. In a special edition which committed itself to the class struggle to complete the state, the National Bolsheviks, for the first time, presented themselves to the general public. Ascension Day, 1930, thus saw the group of social revolutionary nationalists establish themselves as the National Bolshevik thesis. And the foundational work, Social Revolutionary Nationalism, from here to the other national revolutionary groups, became more and more infected with this tendency. The socialist nation became the national communist mouthpiece. Such as a national Bolshevist position today is no longer so surprising as it was years ago. Even more circles of the people, especially of the younger generation, are today of anti-capitalist disposition, are through their mindset National Bolsheviks, even if they don't use that term. And where does one still find youth today who, turning their attentive eyes on their era, on the unemployment offices and working districts, are still willing to justify and defend a social order that prevents 95% of the German people from having a share at all in what they're supposed to call their fatherland? It is the honest prerogative of the youth to break down the old defenses and the youth to find the features of German National Bolshevism. Daily, do we realize, right, Frank Thies was one of the few of our father's generation who joined with us when he observed, in Germany today a new faith is emerging, a faith in the autonomy and the hyper-reality of the nation, in the inescapability of their unifying compulsion, in the immutability of our destiny, in the indestructible force of our will to live. Only at a time in the greatest economic hardship and unspeakable adversity there could be raised over this life of destitution and austerity a doom and faith in the ununified lives of a nation. Only at a time of national misfortune is a genuine national worldview possible. Indeed, the will to a new order of divergent parts pushes us towards the new state ethos, but such ideals do not spring into the world overnight. Rather, they fulfill themselves in spasms of crises over the course of decades. There are long years of disappointment, hardship, and experience necessary to achieve them. A new world begins, a new nation is formed. Yes, an invisible revolution is perpetually in progress. Only its outer course has a revolutionary character. The way the old truths whose binding values still have validity a decade ago are abruptly washed away. Instead, their newly emerged objectives, which were scarcely taken seriously before this swirling speed of events taking place amidst a phenomenon that stands there place like Rocker de Bronze, all the something of the silent drumbeats of revolution, an appearance that is magnificent, sinister, and historically unprecedented. Young nationalism. The youth in Germany today are faced with a concrete decision. Either Junsedori, to be the last contingent of yesterday's age, in a clear acknowledgement of the hopeless situation of the bourgeoisie who have failed politically in every circumstance, or else, as socialists, to be the guardians of the original values of German history and even of the bourgeoisie culture. Sitting in solitary with the proletariat in their class struggle without the sentimental procult, there is no compromise solution. This decision does not cut off the German youth from the history of their people and the facts around which every political decision must be oriented today. Make the choice clear enough. The lost war, doomed due to its structure, justifying unvolkish politics, due to the bourgeoisie's corruption amidst the commercial tumult. This made us into most profoundly anti-bourgeoisie. The lost revolution, doomed to the half measures and the lack of instinct on the part of its leaders, lost of blindness towards the national task of radical upheaval that made us all more revolutionary. The lost sovereignty of Germany, its doom guaranteed by the liberal capitalist Weimar Republic, and sustained through its subordination to Paris and Wall Street, that made us unequivocally nationalists. The lie of the Volksgemeinschaft, a lie which defamed the process of renewing the body of the Volk, was imbibed by the new states, people destroying strive for power. This made of us fighting comrades in the class struggle, the hopeless fate of the post-war generations. The recognition of this fate is contingent on all anti-grassroots, property, bourgeoisie, capitalist order. This made us into anti-capitalists, made us into socialists. Unquestionably, the Bundeswehr's willness, as demonstrated by the Jugendbund and Freikorps and so on, to subordinate oneself and one's freedom to the we, to the self-selected collective, is not to be underestimated. It is pre-political rather than a fact of politics. Ultimately, it is a pedagogical category. The Bundeswehr's ideal is not a political principle. It does not have to commit itself to concrete manifestation in German politics. All the theories that the Bundeswehr's front can achieve state power tomorrow will be able to transfer the laws of the collective life from the young people to the state order are indeed beautiful, but regardless, just as romantic utopianism. The true fronts work differently. The youth movement has made many accomplishments. Its educational aspects are undeniable today and no longer can be undone. Politically, however, it has failed all along the line. In order to evaluate German politics correctly, the youth movement has to learn one thing: the significance of the Germany of big cities, the unemployment office, and the mass actions. The youth movement is dead. Long live politics. This slogan, which years before closed out a leadership congress of the largest Bund, must be taken seriously at last of every single Bundish type. Then only, and only then, will power and success for the whole be propried from the substantial force which undoubtedly exists there. Being young is not a virtue, and general political conflict is nothing new in the process of biological law. Only at the crossroads of centuries, youth stands for the precept of decaying spiritual epochs. Does the generational question take on a historical and therefore also political meaning? Even the youth movement, not engineered by aspirations, but born out of alienations of lives of the young from the sociological and ideological values of their fathers, taking shape as the struggle for the autonomy of the youthful community life, has no political mission per se. To want to spur the politics of the youth movement as the political fronts of Germany today, a dream that many of us once clung to, is absurd. Attitude and intellectual openness are not yet political values. Birth certificates are not political identity cards. Existential consciousness is the only pre-political basis, never a political certification. There are no political duties for the young generation as a whole. Beyond that, one would have to take into account how much the individual age groups between 1840 differ today in their basic rhythms. But there is an approach for the youth that sees the nation as the central value of their personal lives and their societal function. The revolutionary bourgeoisie youth, which to this day, undoubtedly for the most part, sees in National Socialism the fulfillment of its combining the national revolutionary economics, is the social bearer of what the bourgeoisie called National Bolshevism. There are no policies for the Jugendbund cut off from the fronts of their father. There are no politics in the younger generation in the battle of youth against age. But there is a mission for young nationalism, particularly the post-war youth, which, after over 10 years of the front generation struggling in vain, only they are able to resolve to plant the flags of the nation camp of class struggle, to pass on to the word-of-mouth watchword Germany in the Hebelbahn of the revolution, to form alongside formations of proletariat parties an order of nationalist, anti-bourgeoisie, and anti-capitalist revolutionaries, to establish a focal point of immortal Germanness in the camp of today's fatherlandlists, and the readiness of the moral of the task is young revolutionary nationalism. Only there can be the questions which Germany's youth today be answered. We do not consider following Oswald Spengler, consul, endure the lost position of a sinking world, like that of a Roman soldier whose bones were found in the front gate of Pompeii, who died at his post because the eruption of Vesuvius, they had forgotten to relieve him. Reformed National Socialism? Some time ago, there came across the press an announcement of the founding of a German Socialist Party, which had set itself the goal of uniting the miscellaneous National Socialist splinter groups and secessionists as a kind of purified National Socialism to honor the promises not fulfilled by Adolf Hitler, and to reoccupy the political position he abandoned, anticipating the true National Socialists, after recognizing the betrayal of their previous leader, would in turn instead to the reformers. The claim to represent true National Socialism is not new. Both the fighting of revolutionary National Socialists, which constitutes the core of the Black Front led by Dr. Otto Strasser, as well as the independent National Socialist combat camp of Germany of Captain Stennes, made such a claim. The numerical weakness of these groups is not an argument against their political capabilities. The evolution of the Hitler Party has made one sufficiently skeptical of the superiority of the big boys against the splinters. But following him from the political and societal function of such front formats, which remains the basic inquiry into, and following that, the search for the historical departure point as reformed National Socialism. The main reason why every attempt at reform, an approach which puts their mission wrong from the very beginning, involves turning against the NSDAP, is due to the accusation of personal inadequacy against the old party leaders, deviation to the old 25-point line, as well as their pursuit of the wrong tactical measures. They all want to be National Socialists, those who turn against the unsatisfactory Hitler, against the influence of the big shots, against a creeping bourgeoisie mentality, against the Brown House, against the incorrect legal measures of the party leadership, each believing themselves to be in the one position of the true ring. Otto Strasser has, to that end, provided the framework of a worldview of 20th century. Captain Stennes appeals to the revolutionary sentiment and yearning of the SA members. The German Socialist Party is turning away from the incorrect measures of the last quarter. And here it is, the breaking point of all these attempts. Being an opposition group can be valuable. The fate of various oppositions within the Marxist camp, however, shows clearly that enough of the most auspicious fate awaiting an opposition is that its arguments, 3/4 of which are only ever respect to tactical differences, will one day be silently accepted, with the conscience of the party thereupon, without any further ado, shedding its entire reason for existence. If the real failure of the Hitler Party is not due to the inadequacy of its leading personalities, but is based instead in the party's fundamentally poor decisions, then any such reformer misses the core issue and becomes a miniature copy of the bigger brother, never the bearer of historical laws. The fascist mistake. The disastrously misguided historical mission of which that quite justified be called National Socialism can already be seen in Hitler's party first months of work, 1919, in which the anti-statist sentiments against Berlin were practically a philosophy of life on the other side of the main line, whereas referred to look to Rome rather than to the Prussian Gaul, were underlined by a pronounced historical figure, a mistake which defiantly rejected the character of the Germanic uprising against Paris. At that moment, when those under Versailles alone were capable of making history, the slogan of rebellion against Versailles was supplemented by the domestic political slogan against Marxism, turning on its head the willingness in the party's name to take the side of the destitute or the homeless, the fatherlandless, in order to create them a homeland, via radical change to societal and economic life. Upon realizing that the demand of the hour was through socialism to the nation, the calculation of fascist property bourgeoisie became beat Marxism and you can eliminate folk-destructive class stratification. Thus the principle of the NSDAP committed itself was false from the start and therefore doomed to failure every attempted renaissance of its spirit, which reaffirms the same principle. A look at the development of Italian fascism demonstrates the inevitable obligatory lawfulness of the fighting position. In recent months, Dr. K. A. Wittfogel was unequivocally able to prove on the basis of old ideological texts the first fascist programs bore a thoroughly revolutionary socialist character, thoroughly equivalent to the German USDP. So long as the fascios stood by these demands, they simply remained one of the many trouble-making frontline fighters association. At that moment, however, just as occurred in Germany in 1919, in which the bourgeoisie, menaced by the Bolshevik wave, recognized the chance to deploy these militant forces for its own security, then fascism emerged theoretically and practically as an anti-Marxist force, unambiguously assumed a societal function as a security organization for the establishment. Well, on the 1st of May, the cells of fascist railwaymen made it impossible to carry out a general strike for the first time in Italy, when the fascist fighting leagues, with clandestine support from the government, liquidated the syndicalist occupation of the factories. Then had Mussolini completely ignored the old radical points of his program, created the psychological conditions for the anti-Bolshevik forces more or less to gladly clear the way for establishment of peace and order. Historical error of the NSDAP. The parallel is obvious. The Seven-Men Council in Munich as anti-fascist forces, and likewise through its alignment, though the emotional anti-capitalism and breaking up the bonds of interest only attracted to the uprooted revolutionary layers of radicalized front soldiers, students, etc., became a piece on the chessboard of sluggishly reviving bourgeois politics at the moment it became clear that from them the forces could be formed that would be able to push back against the advancing Marxist working class and possibly be in the position to eliminate them. In a situation where the urgent decision to be made on the class forces was increasingly clear-cut, whoever took up the slogan against Marxism in the battle between capital and labor had to remain willingly or unwillingly indifferent out of necessary in order to be able to side with those who had every interest in repudiating Marxism's political and economic claims to power. Finance, capital, and large landowners, jobless officers, and restoration-obsessed feudal lords all could at the moment overlook a few pragmatic blemishes, since they still demonstrated the NSDAP's possibilities for returning distribution of German politics back into its old state. The blame for this development does not lie with the incapable Osthoff Herstrasser, or even Herschels, who likewise paralyzed to escape from the internal dynamic. One may reject the points of Marxist program, one may maintain that its moral was deficient and out of date, but refute it neither by coaxing itself with stormtroopers. It can only overcome within itself. Russia shows that. As a nationalist, one's thinking on German politics today must be in terms of forces, not ideologies. On one hand, there is today a government whose domestic policies signify the darkest reaction, the further intensification of class distinctions, and the creating of a living subhumanity under the state of exception, in which the national unity necessary for achieving sovereignty is thoroughly weakened. A foreign policy directed towards France, with Christian intentions of intervention, and the fascist movement as the external trustee of the bourgeoisie legacy, united with the propertied middle class and the incapable of national liberation, as well as that of socialist revolution. And on the other hand, there are the revolutionary working classes organized in and with the KPD, negating with the fundamental principles of foreign policy enslavement from Versailles to Young, and ready for the revolutionary deed, which will transfer the economy into the hands of the whole, making the fatherlandless the stewards of the new fatherland that will create the nation. With such a clear and hopeless separation between the two, Revolutionary nationalism cannot wait as the third front until both are rendered obsolete and internally overcome. An otherwise third front will become, as per Hans Zetter, the front line of national authority, the Reichswehr. Revolutionary nationalism must take sides in order to ambiguously be fighting comrade, to be with the anti-fascist forces, to be with the formations that want to fight for the socialist fatherland tomorrow. One must therefore belong to the side of the KPD, where the struggle for work, the nation, and socialism is being fought, where the class struggle is affirmed as a path for revolution. Nationalist communism. From the beginning, a succession of relatively small far-right groups have kept their distance from the NSDAP, which today consensually stands against them because they were national communist and anti-fascist. The more apparent it becomes that Adolf Hitler is unable to honor his promises, the promises of which he today holds the column of the idealistic anti-capitalist youth, under his banner alongside crowds of people anxious to safeguard their own interests, the closer the hour comes when, in Germany, the mocked long and long-scored position of national communism can be realized. Today we are still utopians, but the far-sighted among the conservative grail keepers already see the danger for them approaching on the horizon. Albert Eggering Günther, the co-editor of Deutsche Volksstimme, wrote, "In the National Revolutionary Youth, which proves momentum to the national opposition, a deep suspicion sets in. Shall we one day let as white storm comes against a red flood? These and other insights awaken mistrust against the foreign policy of the credit-hungry business group. So it stands to reason to decide against white, that is, for red, National Bolshevism. If we are on the right track in this attempt at interpretation, so can we predict that the moment the exponents of economic reason gain influence over the national opposition and bring them not economic relief, but instead a new subjugation to France, the National Socialist masses undergo transformation of the state of being. They become National Bolsheviks. National Bolshevism will obtain the same fervor as National Socialism, but it will also be directed against German entrepreneurship, perhaps by a different ecstatic drummer. This analysis, written by the time of brewing government, is still valid. It will particularly applies to Hitler's situation. And the conservative politician who experts a lot from National Socialism already knows what it pretends for bourgeois nationalist politics when he dispersively continues. The strength of National Bolshevism cannot be discerned from the membership of a party nor the circulation of periodicals. One must have a feeling for the youth's willingness to decide for National Bolshevists in order to grasp how suddenly a movement can spring from a circle of sectarians into the Volk. If the failure of the Hitler Party becomes clearly obvious, following from its renunciation of economic restructuring and socialist construction, following from its readiness to treat the treaty series untouched, then the activist revolutionary forces will be freed from it as a result, will not be able to be maintained with half measures as the opposition offer, but will want to go completely over to the other side of socialism. The largest percentage of people, however, will not go over to the KPD, out of deep position that its national sentiment is mere tactics and not grounded in innermost being. There is the mission of the German National Communism, to form cadres who are prepared, for the sake of the nation, to sever all bourgeois ties who no longer have any relationship with the values and judgments of their fathers, since they were plucked from their jobs, studies, careers, and turfed out onto the street, and who, for precisely that reason, want Germany, and a Germany that is their own. The mission of the National Revolutionary Groups is to be the rallying point for those in a fighting community with the Marxist KPD, forefront of those revolutionaries and socialists who, as non-materials, avow the nation as the ultimate value. But they are also ready for radical revolution for the sake of nation, because only that creates the preconditions for nation building. Three different things make this political position politically effective: consistent will to be socialist in the truest sense of the word, To be aware of oneself as non-Marxist, to be nationalists of faith and knowledge, and fundamental rejection of any desire and attempt to reform National Socialism. Not reformed National Socialism, but a block of uncompromising young nationalist forces in Germany, with steadfast socialist will and unwavering nationalist faith, recognition of the practical situation conferred through Versailles, fighting comradeship with the KPD. Only in this way is the formation of an organized German national communism worthwhile. The KPD will become its compatriot. Fascism, quasi-fascism, will find it in their most dangerous opponent, and it will have to step forward when the time is right. The face of national communism. In the outline, German national communism proclaims, we recognize the necessity of the German Socialist Revolution. It is the spiritual transformation that determines the economic, political, and cultural features of our time. It is in effect the revolution of the workers, peasants, and the proletariatized middle class. We commit ourselves to the nation. It is our political value as a faithful expression of Volkish community. We commit ourselves to the Volk as a national ethnic cultural community in contrast to ethnically destructive Western civilization. We commit ourselves to the intrinsic meaning of German folkdom. We commit ourselves into a socialist planned economy after breaking capitalist order binds Vulcan nation an organic economic structure as socialist economy constitutes the foundation of the state sovereignty. The fulfillment of our aims is the free Greater German People's Council state as an expression of the self-government of the productive Volk. The means of production are to be transferred to the nation as common property, and the nation's fundamental ownership of the land and soil to be declared. Consequently, nationalization of all large-scale and medium-scale enterprises, immediate, extensive settlement of the East with expropriation of large estates, partial awarding of small holdings to second and third peasants' sons and farm workers as Reich and Dales, partial socialization of state goods, or replacement of Roman private law with German common law, state monopoly on foreign trade, nationalization of the monetary system, for the transitional period after the revolution, autocracy of the economic region of Russia, Germany, German autocracy is the ultimate goal. The situation today calls for a ruthless struggle against all foreign policy enslavement treaties from Versailles to Young until they are torn to shreds. Struggle against all aspects of the Weimar system and its sanctioning of external servitude from Hildefeld to Hitler until it is annihilated. Struggle against Roman politics in German territory. Struggle for a racially appropriate religiosity attuned to the German people as a precondition for the Volkish unity. A policy of alliance with the Soviet Union. Supporting revolutionary movements to create a united front of all oppressed classes and nations. The situation today necessitates the most severe execution of class struggle of the oppressed against all who represent the private capitalist dogma and the sanctity of private property. That is the only way to the German sovereign socialist nation. To safeguard the revolution against seizure by international capital and against counter-revolutionary aspirations, the revolutionary people's militia, Volksheer, shall replace the mercenary army at the moment of revolution. And the indivisibility of Greater Germany is to be proclaimed upon the establishment of the socialist state. To achieve these goals, what is necessary today, a fighting community of revolutionary nationalism with the class party of revolutionary proletariat, the KPD. Why not KPD? As these theses demonstrate, the revolutionary nationalism and the communists today are unquestionably on the same side of the political front line against fascism and capital for socialism and national liberation. Why are we not in the KPD? Revolutionary German nationalism strives for as its ultimate political goal as the sovereign German nation existing in a community of free states of people, Volksstaat, independent from one another. Revolutionary Marxism, led to KPD, strives for as its ultimate goal the class of society unites the people into higher unity. Revolutionary nationalism affirms the class struggle as an organic upheaval in the leadership of the body of the Volk. which by replacing the obsolete ruling class reorients the youthful new state to a leadership based on the political and societal functions of whole. Revolutionary Marxism views history as a succession of class struggles, with victorious participation in such struggles as the mean which the international proletariat can overcome the international capitalism with international socialism. It recognizes the bondage of class over the boundaries of primary reality that is folkdom. Some today are fighters for national freedom and class fighters for the sake of nation, others are for the sake of the class of society. Revolutionary nationalism strives for the implementation of a socialist planned economy on the basis of autarky, for the elimination of private ownership over the means of production, for nationalization of land and soil, all preconditioned for the sovereignty of the nation to be created by the revolution. Revolutionary Marxism strives for planned economic organization of the world, netting autarkic economic ideas by eliminating private ownerships of the means of production and socializing land and soil. Socialist construction in a country, Russia, is only conceivable as a preliminary stage. Revolutionary nationalism does not believe in the possibility of eternal peace and a humanity capable of nullifying the antagonisms between different people, friend-enemy principle. Revolutionary Marxism strives for a pacified world guaranteed after the abolition of economic antagonisms. Revolutionary nationalism strives for an appropriately German solution to the peasant question. It is of the conviction that an integration of the small peasants into the planned economy through private property abolishing fief system must preserve the internal category of the peasant. It must be utilized by the state as a reservoir of power. Revolutionary Marxism seems to liquidate regressive class through collectivization, nationalizing farming operations with the end goal of the synthesis of the worker into a classless human type, Russia. Revolutionary nationalism understands the potency of the need for religious renewal, and the existence of irrational forces. It sees the idea of the nation as the ultimate goal, and in folkdom, a faithfully immanent power. All politically and economic imperatives are the means of giving this idea form and reality. Revolutionary Marxism, building on historical materialism, interprets the process of human history from their economic conditions and assignments the ideological superstructure to the secondary role. Belief in the irrational is to be certainly and will be certainly overcome. Revolutionary nationalism is anti-fascist because fascism, aside from its racially alien characteristics, does not understand how to incorporate the leadership of the proletariat in its economic order is only a reform of capitalism. Fascism is capitalism in decay, and in its corporate state form, it is a camouflaged dictatorship over the working folk or people, which thereby perpetuates the division of nation into ruler and ruled. Revolutionary Marxism sees fascism in a militant self-defense movement for the structure and interests of the capitalist system, directing the movements of the petty bourgeoisie masses with pseudo-ideologies formed for the purpose of its own preservation. Revolutionary nationalism strives for political and economic with the Soviet Union as the only European opponent of the Versailles system and as a socialist neighboring state on the grounds it fights against any intervention against Soviet Russia. Revolutionary Marxism calls for the defense of the Soviet Union as the fatherland of the working people and the beginning of world communism. Revolutionary nationalism rejects any intention of acquiring colonies in recognition of the fundamental rights of oppressed peoples to national freedom in accordance with its own watchword of national sovereignty. On the path towards a community of free peoples, it hails the liberation movements of India, China, and Egypt, etc., as allies in the fight against the signatory powers of the Versailles, just as it hails the internal struggle of the proletariat against the international fixed capital. Revolutionary Marxism hails the national revolutionary movements of colonial and semi-colonial peoples as persecutors of the proletarian world revolution. Revolutionary nationalism insists of the use of racial question for an establishment of the born-to-rule master race, rejects race dogmatism as a Exhortation for foreign policy and in the construction of socialism demands as evidence for the value of race not entitled but achievement. Revolutionary Marxism sees race in an economic category that receives its true meaning in the class of society and rejects its usage in forming political slogans. Revolutionary nationalism sees the counter-structure in the self-government and productive folk, the guarantee of political accountability, and the economic control of the Volksgemeinschaft, prestige in the early form of Germanic rule. Revolutionary Marxism strives through the council structure's division into executive and legislative powers to move towards the eventual superfluity of the state. Already in a few of these comparisons, and putting aside more detailed descriptions of their individual points, it follows that the growth goals of nationalism and Marxism are thoroughly different. It is nonetheless also, however, that demands today's politics yield and range from demands and insight from Marxism and nationalism, which coincide class struggle, revolution, socialism, councils, foreign policy, anti-fascism, although the rationales for them are different. Young nationalism, however, has a mission for tomorrow extending beyond this point today. It is unity in faith and blood with political principles and formation. Under this site, the small cadres of National Bolshevist nationalism are formed today alongside and not within the KPD. Nevertheless, they affirm their affiliation with it, because notwithstanding the different objectives, the Communist Party in Germany today is the only mass factor against the Versailles system, against the Roman counter-reformation, against the drive to intervene against Russia, against the fascist deception of the people for a socialist revolution for Greater Germany. For war and peace. War and peace can never be in themselves judged per se. The denial or affirmation of their value and status is decided only in relation to the requirements of folkish life, the national will to self-determination, and those personal decisions that affect the national destiny which dominates the lives of individuals. Those unwilling to see and address every problem from the perspective of their individual experience will only be able to pass such a judgment when the relationship to this aspect is clear. War can only be approved of when it is definitely established that it is essential and unavoidable for the future. Freedom and viability of the Volk, only squandering of the Volk's substance, is justified by a greater and more secure future of Volksgemeinschaft itself. But Volk is that in Germany today is merely a mere object of the politics of other states. Can only know one alternative: first freedom, then peace. For sake of freedom always receives, and the invention of gas weapons has changed nothing from the times in which death was brought by sword and spear, its inner sanctification. But never will nationalism itself be able to frame the struggle between peoples in such a fashion. It is in earnest in attributing supreme nation the source of everything it does. Wars, the constitution of politics by other means. This quote from Clausewitz demonstrates that the question of the affirmation or rejection of war cannot be posed abstractly, but must derive from meaning, the legitimacy of politics, whose continuation it is only that communicates the essentials. Dr. Kurt Hiller, for example, accuses me of letting the frivolous position of Ernst Jünger, of whom I quoted something without refuting it, not to be given a sufficiently sharp differentiation. Ernst Jünger is and will remain a beloved example of the daring new nationalists. He has given us, the author of The Adventurous Heart, an eternal bravery of the nationalist faith, but his rationale for war in fire and blood, in which he expresses rejoicing justification for war from anywhere, and not even within the nation, but instead deprives its raison d'être from the unique and great intoxicating opportunities for adventure it provides in fulfilling laws of the earth. We leave no doubt that this must be rejected. Just as little can we accept Junger's much too non-comical political demand for the state which be social, defensive, and authoritarian. The question of war and peace of his revolutionary pacifist sends no hint of a distant sound. In our country cannot be posed in which absolute terms at all. Can only be answered in the context for what for. As national revolutionaries, we stand for the nation as the ultimate value. Its existence and sovereignty is the political certification. Only from this position can everything that happens be appraised. Even the question of war and peace, Carl Schmitt has taught us one thing. For as long as people exist in the political sphere, this people must, even if only in the most extreme cases, and whatever at this point may be reached, has to be decided by itself, but turned by itself in the distinction of friend and enemy. And therein resides the essence of its political existence. Schmitt, the author of one of the best books, Political Romanticism, builds on Adam Muller's thesis. Eternal peace cannot be the ideal of politics. Peace and war should complement each other like movements and repose, mutual relations between states, and prerequisites for growth and prosperity. That means simply that the sovereignty of the socialist nation is the only benchmark according to which the actions of one revolutionary socialist state can be assessed against another. The young socialist professor Heller admits that this, for example, when he avows the national self-determination of the German people to be an immutable goal of our contemporary foreign policy decisions, the implicit respect between socialist nations excludes neither the necessity nor the possibility of military confrontation. Choosing to position itself to others as friend as foe, connotes, as Carl Schmitt correctly infers, war is only the most extreme consequence of enmity. It does not have to be common, normal, something ideal or desirable, but nevertheless remains a real possibility for as long as the concept of the enemy has meaning. And in thus this notion of the enemy will not be able to vanish even in the socialist agitation of free people, so as long as state sovereignty is demanded, so long as it's safeguarding through living space and laws in its own life must always be guaranteed anew. Even among those of us outside the aggregation, no one sees in war simply an alarm clock, a meaning of awakening creative impulses. Not personal opportunities for the adventure, but the collectivity's law of life determines the decision. Revolutionary nationalism thinks politically, not ideologically. Hence, this is why it does not believe so as long as the concept of political becomes reality from the sovereignty of the state, that the decision of the people to be the friend or enemy of another can be done away with. This also means that ultimately affirming the existence of war as ultimate ratio and not as value in and of itself, but as the last resort for safeguarding of state sovereignty. The acid test will be today outdated question of space. The socialist state, which unlike in capitalism, will not artificially restrict the biological power of a Volk. Will someday find itself facing a surplus of humanity, people without space. What then? The Marxists answer that as a consequence of amicable agreement, the population surplus could be settled in other less populated parts of the earth. Perhaps Siberia contradicts utterly the nationalist concept of inseparability of the Volkish organism. Here, there will be the ultima ratio be demonstrated. Either the Volk freely receives its Lebensraum or it takes for itself. Even a socialist nation will be here make the decision, friend or foe. Highest above all is Volk's right to exist, even in socialism. For everything that is required for us happens for the sake of Germany's eternal meaning, whose manifestations change, but from those whose cause is immutable, the state of Germans as generation of success is the German people as a state of fate. Okay, that is part 1. Thank you for listening.